Hi guys. Tonight we step onto the narrow, creaking deck of a medieval ship. Above your head, sails snap in the wind like restless flags, and ropes groan against wooden masts. Below, a cramped wooden stair leads you into the belly of the vessel, where you will try to sleep. The air down here is close, damp, and filled with the mingled smells of salt water, tar, and unwashed men. You may think you can handle a noisy room or a long flight, but try sleeping here, and you probably won't survive the first night without begging for land. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post in the comments where you are and what time it is where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, and let's wander further into the shadows. The first thing you notice as you descend is the way the light dies almost instantly. Only a few lanterns swing from iron hooks, their flames guttering with every lurch of the ship. The glow they cast is yellow and smoky, hardly enough to see by. Yet dozens of men, packed shoulder to shoulder, know every corner by heart. The wooden floor is slick from seawater that drips down through the planks above, leaving shallow puddles that never truly dry. You lift a foot and realize each step comes with the squelch of damp leather. To lie directly on these planks would mean soaking through in minutes, and yet some unlucky souls must do just that. A mainstream historical fact often cited is that hammocks, though now iconic to seafaring, only became widely adopted by European sailors after contact with the Americas in the late 15th and 16th centuries. Before that, many medieval sailors had no such luxury. They rolled themselves into blankets or tried to find a relatively dry spot near the cargo. Imagine the disappointment of a sailor dreaming of warm straw, only to find that their berth is little more than a cold corner under a dripping beam. The ship itself feels alive. Every wave makes the timbers bend and moan, a wooden chorus that never stops. To some ears it is maddening, like a giant's breath right beside you. To others, it is a lullaby, proof that the vessel still holds together. You press your palm against the wall and feel it shudder as the sea presses hard against the hull. No house you have ever slept in behaved like this. Here, the very walls breathe with the rhythm of the ocean. A quirky tidbit whispered in old sailors' journals is that some men swore the ship had moods. When the timbers creaked softly, she was sleeping, and when they bellowed under strain, she was angry. In moments of fear, a sailor might murmur apologies to the boards beneath him, hoping the vessel would calm. Whether superstition or psychological trick, it gave men a sense that they were not entirely alone in the watery night. And still, sleep must be attempted. You find a narrow stretch of beam to lean against, knees pulled close, cloak wrapped tight. The air is heavy with human-present sweat, damp wool, and the sour tang of yesterday's rations. Breathing here feels like inhaling a mixture of salt and fatigue. Yet eyes grow heavy despite the discomfort, because exhaustion has a way of triumphing over every protest. Historians still argue whether medieval sailors truly managed much rest at all in these conditions, or whether most nights were simply broken naps between duties. Some argue that human bodies adapted, learning to steal moments of unconsciousness despite the uproar. Others suggest the constant lack of sleep wore men down quickly, making voyages far more dangerous than we imagine. The debate lingers, because first-hand accounts are scarce and often colored by exaggeration or myth. You curl tighter, listening to the roar above, the splash of water against the hull, and the groans of timber. It feels as though the sea is pressing in, demanding your attention, refusing to let you close your eyes. Yet you know this is only the first of many such nights. The voyage has just begun, and the ocean's cradle will not release you easily. Slowly, against every discomfort, your eyelids fall. The storm is not something you hear so much as something you wear, pressed into your skin by every gust and every surge. Above deck, the sails snap with a violence that shakes the mast to its very core, each sound like the crack of a whip across the sky. Water hammers the planks, sluicing through gaps, pouring down in rivulets that snake into the dark hold where you are lying. The effect is that even below you cannot escape. The storm roars as though it is determined to live inside your skull, vibrating through bone and nerve. You press your hands to your ears, but the sea laughs at the attempt. It's worth noting one well-established historical fact is that medieval ships, especially cogs and caravels, were not designed with comfort in mind. Their holds were built for cargo, not for human habitation, so crewmen often slept wedged between barrels or sacks of goods. Picture trying to doze while lying next to a leaking cask of salted fish, your blanket clinging damp to your skin, while thunder makes the very ceiling rattle. It is not the kind of slumber a poet would sing about. And yet, men had no choice but to endure. The pitch of the ship throws you left and right like a toy in a child's hand. You dig in your heels, trying not to roll onto your bunkmate. He mutters curses in the dark, elbowing you back into your place. And you realize that privacy is a dream more distant than land. The storm does not allow careful boundaries. It shoves men together like grain in a sack. A quirky tidbit sometimes told by chroniclers is that certain sailors claimed they could forecast storms from the way their dreams shifted. If nightmares grew vivid, full of breaking masts and flooding decks, they would wake convinced that a tempest was on the horizon. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps the subconscious registering subtle changes in wind and motion before the storm arrived. Still, these omens were treated with a peculiar respect, and a man who dreamed badly might find the crew side-eyeing him the next morning. Your body vibrates with the noise. Every crack of thunder feels like it booms inside your ribs, rattling the breath out of you. Lanterns swing wildly, shadows stretching and shrinking across the curved hull. A rope slaps against wood in a rhythm that never matches the pounding of the waves, and together they make a chaos orchestra that refuses to be ignored. Sleep, under such bombardment, becomes a matter of surrender. Your body is exhausted enough to demand it, yet every crash jerks you awake again. It is like trying to nap beside a battlefield, waiting for the next cannon blast. Historians still puzzle over whether sailors simply trained themselves to sleep through storms, dulling their senses to survive, or whether most of them stumbled through voyages in a constant haze of half-sleep. Some accounts insist men grew used to it after weeks at sea. Others describe crews reduced to trembling shadows, barely able to perform their duties. You lie there, wrapped in the storm's fury, asking yourself whether sleep is possible at all. And then, for a fleeting second, you feel it, the rocking of the ship aligning with your breath, your eyelids closing heavier than before. The storm continues its merciless concert, but for the briefest heartbeat, you drift. The storm rages on, and you finally understand why sleep is considered both a necessity and a gamble on a medieval ship. In the shadows of the lower deck, sailors begin tugging at lengths of canvas and rope, preparing the contraptions that would later become legendary, their hammocks. You watch as one man knots the ends with a kind of weary skill, securing his bed between two beams overhead. Another scrambles to claim the higher spot, for he knows that sleeping nearer the floor means an unwanted shower of drips from the planks above. The air smells of tar and damp hemp, and when you place your hand on the rough rope, splinters threaten your palm. It is well documented that hammocks in their true form arrived in Europe after sailors encountered them in the Caribbean, where indigenous peoples had already perfected the art of swinging sleep between trees. But even before then, sailors were experimenting with suspending themselves off the ground, sometimes with canvas slings, sometimes with crude nets to escape the soggy, rat-ridden planks below. Imagine lying flat on a barrel, rocked endlessly, versus swaying in a sling that actually moves with the ship's rhythm. The second choice, while far from ideal, at least gave a chance of true rest. The atmosphere is a kind of strange ballet. Dozens of bodies sway gently in hammocks, swinging in opposite arcs as the ship lurches. Lantern light flickers across their faces, catching brief glimpses of closed eyelids, twitching dreams and clenched jaws. Some men snore with abandon, others mutter, and one or two clutch their arms as though bracing against an invisible fall. The motion is not unlike being cradled, though it can quickly become a curse if seasickness has taken hold. The back-and-forth swing does not soothe a stomach already churning with salted fish and rough ale. A curious note appears in scattered ship journals. Men sometimes tied themselves into their hammocks, looping ropes around their waists to prevent being flung out during sudden rolls. More than one sailor woke to find himself dangling sideways, legs kicking uselessly, as though caught in a spider's web. It might look comical to an observer, but in the moment, dangling upside down in a dark, storm-tossed hold was anything but funny. You hear the thrum of the ship's timbers, that low wooden heartbeat that never ceases. Each time the sea crashes against the hull, the hammocks sway in near unison, bodies brushing shoulders, elbows grazing, curses muttered under breath. Sleep is a communal act here. No privacy, no soft feather mattress to withdraw into. You share your warmth, your breath, and your nightmares with the men around you. If one has lice, everyone eventually itches. If one coughs, the whole crew lies awake listening, wondering whether sickness will spread before landfall. Chroniclers disagree on how restful these hammocks truly were. Some depict them as a small miracle, allowing sailors to finally relax despite storms, while others claim they were nothing more than damp slings that left men bruised and sore. The truth is likely both. On some nights, the swing matched the rhythm of the sea so perfectly that even the most exhausted sailor could close his eyes and drift. On others, the violent heave of the waves turned each hammock into a pendulum of misery, slamming its occupant against the beam until sleep was a cruel fantasy. You shift closer to the wall, listening to the creak of rope above and the groan of beams below. The storm hasn't lessened. It screams through the timbers, shaking every nail. Yet here, suspended in mid-air, you sense the beginnings of adaptation. The human body, after all, can learn to rest in almost any circumstance. The question is not whether you will find comfort, it is whether exhaustion will finally drag you into unconsciousness before the next wave slaps you awake. For now, you surrender to the sway, rocked between terror and drowsiness, drifting in and out of half-dreams while the storm outside shows no mercy. The hammocks swing like pendulums in the shadows, but the real test is not the contraption itself, it is the space. The ship's hold is narrow, low, and overcrowded. Dozens of men try to occupy a space barely fit for half their number. You shuffle sideways, your shoulders scraping a beam, your feet stumbling against a barrel that leaks a briny smell of fish. No matter where you look, there is someone's elbow, someone's boot, someone's damp cloak spreading across the floor. It is as though the ship has swallowed the crew whole, cramming them into its wooden stomach without care for dignity or rest. Contemporary accounts make clear that medieval sailors had to share every inch of living space. Hammocks, strung side by side, left only the slimmest aisles. Men who were too late to claim a sling made do on the deck itself, curled against ropes or sacks of grain. The idea of privacy, of a quiet corner, simply did not exist here. You learn quickly that comfort is not the absence of hardship, but the ability to endure it without complaint. The air thickens with every breath exhaled. You notice how the lantern light barely penetrates the haze of sweat and smoke. A man beside you scratches incessantly at his arm, muttering curses under his breath. Another snores with a harsh rasp that rises and falls in rhythm with the waves. When he stops suddenly, silence hangs heavy until he snorts awake again, and the chorus resumes. You realize that in such conditions, rest is rarely uninterrupted. It comes in fragments, moments snatched between noises, like crumbs gathered from a table. There's a peculiar belief preserved in sailors' lore that dreams in such close quarters could bleed together. One man's nightmare of drowning might trigger another's fear of suffocation, as if the collective breath of the crew spun a shared tapestry of unrest. Whether superstition or simply the result of contagious anxiety, it gave men the eerie sense that the ship's crew dreamed as one body, a single nervous system swaying on the dark sea. The floor beneath you trembles each time the hull groans under pressure. It is not only sound that keeps you awake, but vibration, the constant jolt of motion transmitted through every board. It makes your teeth chatter in your skull. Your muscles ache as though you've been walking all day. To rest here is to attempt stillness in the heart of motion itself, and the futility of it gnaws at your patience. Some researchers maintain that the closeness of bodies was a double-edged sword. On one hand, warmth was shared, and in cold weather, this prevented freezing. On the other hand, the spread of disease became rampant, with coughs and fevers passing swiftly through a crew. The absence of fresh air and the presence of damp made illness nearly inevitable. When you imagine a voyage not of days but of weeks or even months, the pressure of that reality weighs on your chest. The smell alone is its own adversary. You inhale the mix of tar, pitch, mildew, and human sweat until it becomes a second skin, a smell that clings no matter how you cover your face. Your blanket, your clothes, even your hair absorb it. At some point, you stop noticing, though when you wake in fragments, you catch it afresh and gag, as if for the first time. This is the scent of the voyage, a perfume of survival that marks every sailor whether he returns to land or not. Still, you notice how quickly men adapt. They laugh, even in these conditions. Someone mutters a joke about the cook's stew being thicker than the seawater dripping through the beams, and a ripple of chuckles runs through the hammocks. The humor is weary but essential. Shared misery becomes a bond, a shield against despair. You can almost believe that the snoring, the coughing, the scratching, all of it is a kind of lullaby when wrapped in laughter. The debate among historians remains unresolved. Did sailors truly sleep enough to function? Or did they stagger through voyages half awake, their labor powered only by sheer will? Some evidence suggests that watch schedules and routine allowed moments of real rest. Other evidence implies that exhaustion was a permanent companion, tolerated, but never conquered. Whichever version is true, what you feel in your own bones is undeniable. Rest here is not about comfort, it is about necessity. So you pull your cloak tighter, ignoring the press of another man's boots against your ribs, ignoring the itch on your neck, ignoring the crash of waves. You close your eyes and surrender to whatever fragments of sleep will come, because on this ship, that is the only choice. The sound of the timbers is impossible to ignore. You lie still in the swaying dark, and every groan, every creak, every sharp report of wood under strain seems to run straight into your bones. The ship is alive, there is no other way to describe it. Each joint, each beam, each nail sings its own note in the endless chorus of stress and survival. It is both terrifying and oddly reassuring. If the ship is speaking, then perhaps it still holds. If the sound were to stop entirely, silence might mean the sea has won. Surviving records confirm that sailors often described their vessels in almost human terms. They spoke of ships sighing, ships groaning, ships crying out in protest when the waves pummeled them. A vessel creaking in rhythm was a good sign. It meant the wood flexed and bent rather than breaking. In fact, chroniclers noted that silence could be far more dangerous, because it hinted that timbers had stiffened and might soon crack. For men lying awake in hammocks or on wet planks, these sounds became a strange lullaby, a reminder that the ship, like them, fought to survive. You listen closely. The ship shudders with each impact, and the sound rises up through the beams, as though through the strings of an enormous instrument. It is music of an eerie sort, a background drone that never ceases. Sometimes it grows louder with a crashing wave, sometimes it dips to a low moan, but it is never gone. When you press your cheek against the wood, you feel the vibrations against your skin, as though the ship's heartbeat has merged with your own. There's an odd little note in certain old seafaring diaries. Some men believed that if you knocked gently on the hull in the dead of night, the ship would answer back. Not with words, of course, but with a sympathetic creak, a shift in timber, a sound that felt like acknowledgement. Whether it was coincidence or imagination, this ritual comforted sailors who feared the black water just inches away. For them, the ship was not just a vessel, but a companion, a friend who murmured back in the dark. But for all its music, the noise also drove men to distraction. Sleep was often interrupted not only by thunder and waves, but by the ship itself, forever reminding them of its struggle. Some sailors stuffed scraps of cloth into their ears, desperate for a few hours of peace. Others claimed they could tell the difference between normal groans and those that warned of real danger. To lie awake in the dark, listening for the sound of splintering, was to hover on the edge of panic, never knowing if the next wave would be the one that tore the hull apart. The scholarly debate lingers over how much faith sailors truly placed in these sounds. Were they accurate interpreters of creaks, or were they merely inventing meaning to survive the fear? Some historians argue that long experience taught them subtle cues, small differences in pitch or rhythm that signaled damage. Others dismiss this as folklore, pointing out that catastrophic leaks often came without warning. The truth is muddled, buried beneath centuries of hearsay and half-remembered tales. You roll onto your side, the hammock pressing against your ribs, and try to imagine silence. Could you even sleep without the groans, without the constant complaint of wood? Perhaps not. The body grows used to its cage, and what once seemed unbearable becomes strangely necessary. The noise fills the void where fear might otherwise settle. Better to hear the ship sing than to lie awake listening only to your own heart pounding. The air grows thicker as the night wears on. Lanterns burn low, smoke mixing with damp. You catch the faint whimper of a man dreaming, perhaps carried away into nightmares of the sea. Another shifts violently in his sling, muttering in a tongue you do not understand. Yet all of it is wrapped inside that deeper sound, the endless chorus of wood and wave, the ship and sea locked in dialogue. Eventually, your ears stop fighting. They surrender, folding the creaks and groans into the rhythm of your breath. The sound becomes background, almost comforting. And slowly, despite yourself, your body begins to drift, carried on the lullaby of timbers straining against the storm. It is not only the ship that keeps you awake. The other creatures who share this floating world make their presence known in ways that are far harder to ignore. Somewhere near your feet, claws scratch against wood. A shadow darts along the beam overhead. You know what it is before you even look. Rats. They own this place as much as any sailor does, scurrying across ropes, gnawing on crumbs of hardtack, darting into gaps in the planks where human fingers cannot follow. Their squeaks and tiny feet blend into the symphony of the storm, and you try to remind yourself that they, too, are simply surviving. Contemporary letters from ship crews mention vermin as casually as they describe sails or rigging. Rats and lice were as permanent as the salt in the air. The presence of these pests was not considered unusual, it was expected. Shipbuilders could coat the beams in pitch. Captains could order fumigation with smoke or herbs. But the vermin always returned, carried aboard in sacks of grain or crawling up mooring ropes at the dock. And once the voyage began, there was no escape. You slept with them. You ate beside them. You lived in their company for weeks on end. A man in the hammock above you twitches, scratching furiously at his skin. Lice, almost certainly. Their bites turn the skin raw, leaving red welts that fester in the damp. You know that tonight you will itch as well, because in such closeness, parasites travel faster than any storm. Sleep, already fragile, becomes nearly impossible when your own body feels like an enemy. You tug your cloak tighter, trying to imagine a barrier between yourself and the crawling world, but you know it is no defense. There's a peculiar account from a 15th century logbook. One sailor claimed that during a particularly bad infestation, he shaved his entire head and eyebrows, thinking it would keep lice at bay. His shipmates mocked him at first, but within days others followed his lead. Soon the hold was full of bald men who looked like monks gone feral, all scratching and laughing bitterly at their own desperation. Such was the creativity born of sleepless nights and unrelenting vermin. You lie still, but your ears betray you. Every squeak sounds louder in the dark. Every scrabble of claws across a beam makes you flinch. You imagine teeth gnawing not only on wood but on your own possessions, your blanket, perhaps even your flesh. The rats, bold as they are, often scurried across sleeping bodies in search of crumbs. Some men kicked out in their sleep, others awoke with bites. The tiny predators thrived where humans could not, and in their way, they became an equal part of the voyage. Researchers are divided on just how severe these infestations were. Some argue that reports exaggerate, painting a picture of horror to entertain readers back home. Others point to the undeniable spread of diseases like typhus and plague, carried easily by vermin, as evidence that the problem was both real and deadly. The truth may lie somewhere between, but what you feel tonight, in the itch beneath your collar and the faint tickle at your ankle, is proof enough. The smell does not help. It mingles with sweat and tar, producing a musk that never fades. When the lantern light shifts, you catch sight of tiny eyes glinting in the gloom. They stare back, unafraid. The storm above means nothing to them. The ship may pitch and groan, but they ride it as calmly as gulls on the wind. For them, every voyage is a banquet. For you, it is a test of endurance. You hear a muffled laugh from the far side of the hold. A sailor mutters something about the rats being better navigators than the captain. The joke spreads, soft chuckles echoing in the dark. This is how men cope with humor sharp enough to cut through disgust. For a moment, the vermin are not tormentors but fellow passengers, part of the absurd comedy of life at sea. But when the laughter fades, the reality remains. You scratch at your sleeve, knowing the lice have already found you. You shift in your hammock, hoping the rats won't cross your chest in the night. And you wonder whether tomorrow you'll wake with fresh bites, or if exhaustion will simply numb you to them. Sleep, fragile as ever, slips further from reach, yet your body is too tired to resist. Slowly, despite the scratching, despite the squeaks, your eyelids grow heavy. You drift into dreams already seeded with the sound of tiny claws in the dark. You draw a slow breath, and it feels heavy in your lungs. The air below deck is not just humid, it is saturated with layers of scent so thick they seem to press against your nostrils. Salt from soaked timbers, the tang of pitch and tar, the rank odor of bodies long unwashed, and the sourness of spoiled ale mingle together into a stench that refuses to be ignored. It is not one smell but a collage of survival, an invisible fog that clings to hair, clothes, even dreams. You try turning your face toward the faint draught seeping from the stairwell, but the relief is slight. Chroniclers of long voyages describe the ship's hold as an unbreathable chamber, and it is not difficult to see why. Lantern smoke hangs in the air, its acrid bite catching at the throat. The men around you breathe heavily, their chests rising and falling like bellows, and each exhale adds another layer of humidity. When the storm intensifies, the hatches are closed tight, sealing you into this chamber as securely as a coffin. If you were claustrophobic before, you would not last an hour. You notice how quickly your senses adjust. At first, the smell makes your eyes water. Then, with each breath, you become less aware of it until a fresh gust of air reminds you how foul it really island. The cycle repeats endlessly. Disgust, numbness, rediscovery, disgust again. It is a rhythm as relentless as the waves. There's a peculiar observation in one Italian sailor's diary. He swore that the smell of tar became so overwhelming after weeks at sea that he could taste it in his bread. Every bite carried a phantom flavor of pitch. Every sip of ale tasted faintly of resin. He claimed it stayed with him even on land, haunting his meals for months after the voyage. Perhaps it was exaggeration, or perhaps the senses truly blur when battered by such constant assaults. You shift in your hammock, inhaling shallowly, trying not to disturb the fog of odor with deeper breaths. Yet exhaustion demands oxygen. You cannot hold back forever. Around you, others cough or mutter, one man retching into a bucket after the rocking, and the smells overwhelm him. His misery only adds another note to the symphony of stench. Sleep here is not only about noise or vermin, It is about convincing your body to accept air that feels unfit for breathing. Some scholars suggest that sailors developed a kind of olfactory resilience, dulling their sensitivity over time. Others argue the opposite, that constant exposure to such foulness weakened them, making disease more likely and rest harder to come by. The debate remains unresolved, but your lungs tell their own story tonight. Each breath feels like effort, each exhale heavier than the last. You wonder how a man could dream in such air. Perhaps the mind escapes where the body cannot. Perhaps the dreams of sailors were brighter simply because their waking world was so dim and sour. Still, you doubt that visions of meadows or hearth fires could survive long in this haze. More likely, dreams here reeked of tar and smoke, shadows infused with the smell of survival. One sailor hums softly nearby, perhaps to distract himself from the stench. Another shifts, his hammock creaking like a reluctant violin string. You pull your cloak tighter, though it is damp, and press the fabric against your nose. It helps for a moment, a filter against the worst of it. But fabric grows saturated quickly, and soon you are left breathing the same heavy fog as before. The ship rocks again, harder this time. Lantern smoke wafts in new directions, curling around beams, catching your throat. You cough, and the man below you curses, annoyed at the shower of ash and dust that rains down from the hammock above. Even in your misery, you smile faintly. These irritations, as unbearable as they feel, are simply the price of life on the sea. If you cannot adapt, you will break. And so you adapt. You close your eyes, you take shallow breaths, and you imagine fresh air that is not there. You pretend the groan of the timbers is the wind through trees, that the pitch and tar are pine sap, that the sweat and bodies around you belong to companions in a hunting lodge. The mind, desperate for rest, weaves illusions. They are fragile, easily broken by the next cough or squeak, but they are enough to carry you toward the edges of sleep. Your lungs ache, your head pounds faintly, but your body yields. Even here, in the worst air you have ever breathed, exhaustion proves the stronger master. You drift off, still surrounded by the sour perfume of survival. Water is never fully kept out. You might expect the ship's planks and pitch to guard you, but the sea is stubborn. It seeps through seams, trickles down beams, and finds its way into every corner. Tonight, droplets fall from above in a steady rhythm, tapping against barrels, splashing into shallow puddles, dripping onto faces of men too tired to shift. You draw your blanket over your head, but even that soon grows damp, clinging to your skin like cold moss. Surviving accounts from voyages along the North Sea note that sailors constantly battled leaks. Crewmen took turns at the pumps, bailing water night and day. Yet still, the floor of the hold was slick, never dry. Sleepers on the planks often awoke with their clothes soaked through, the cold gnawing at joints until movement grew stiff. Salt water, unlike rain, left behind a crust when it dried whitish marks across blankets and boots, a reminder that the sea always won small victories. A spray of wind-driven rain joins the invasion. When hatches are forced open to release the stifling air, gusts carry water down with them. The storm has no respect for boundaries. It demands entry, punishing both above deck and below. You shift in your hammock and feel icy droplets pepper your cheek. Your skin tightens instantly, gooseflesh rising, and the brief hope of warmth vanishes. One odd practice recorded in a Flemish merchant's log is that sailors sometimes stuffed their bedding with straw even at sea, believing the straw would absorb moisture and keep them warmer. In reality, the straw grew mouldy, foul-smelling, and often made matters worse. Still, desperate men clung to the ritual, convinced that at least a thin barrier existed between them and the endless damp. You imagine lying on such bedding, listening to it squelch each time you move, and wonder whether the illusion of comfort is sometimes more valuable than comfort itself. You watch as one sailor, too tired to shift his hammock, lets the drips fall onto his face. His eyes flutter closed anyway. Perhaps exhaustion dulls the sting of cold water, Or perhaps he has simply surrendered to it. You know you will soon do the same. The choice is not between dryness and dampness. It is between waking misery and sleeping misery. You take what you can. Scholars continue to dispute how severe this constant damp was. Some argue that well-maintained ships kept the water largely at bay, while others insist the constant leaks were unavoidable. Archaeological studies of preserved timbers suggest that rot set in quickly, supporting the latter view, but the debate does not matter to you here. What matters is the wet blanket against your chest, the rivulet sneaking down your neck, and the puddle forming beneath the barrel you rest your boots on. The sea is not outside, it is inside, and you are already part of it. You think of warmth, of hearth fires and dry beds, but the thoughts only make the chill sharper. Better to imagine yourself as a creature of water, a fish that does not mind the drip, or a seal that sleeps happily on damp stones. It is a trick of the mind, but it helps. Slowly your body stops resisting the moisture. It becomes just another fact of the voyage, as ordinary as the groaning timbers or the scratching rats. A sailor murmurs nearby, whispering a prayer to St. Nicholas, patron of seafarers. His voice is soft, rhythmic, almost soothing. The words mingle with the patter of water, and for a moment you could almost believe it is a lullaby. The drip becomes percussion, the whisper becomes melody, and your own weary breath completes the song. The sea continues its intrusion, dripping, soaking, chilling, but at last your eyelids lower. Dampness becomes background, no longer shocking, simply constant, and in that surrender you find the edge of sleep. The storm does not care if you are weary. Even when your body begs for stillness, duty demands you rise. The rhythm of life on board is dictated not by the sun or by comfort, but by the relentless watch system. Bells ring above, muffled by the storm but insistent enough to pierce your half-dreams. A hand shakes your shoulder, rough and impatient. Your shift has ended, his has begun, or perhaps the other way around. You are never quite sure in the blur of broken hours. What you do know is this: someone must always be awake, and that someone is sometimes you. It is well established that medieval seafaring relied on watches divided into intervals of roughly 4 hours. The practice kept the ship manned at all times, but it shattered the natural cycle of sleep. Sailors rarely knew the luxury of an unbroken night. Instead, they snatched rest in fragments, 2 hours here, an hour there, never enough to replenish, always enough to keep them moving. You feel the truth of this in your own bones, the heaviness in your eyelids, even as you swing your legs out of the hammock. Around you, others grumble, trading places like dancers in a grim performance. One man collapses into the space you just vacated, asleep before he has even pulled his cloak tight. Another rubs his eyes raw, preparing to take the deck despite his obvious exhaustion. The cycle is merciless, a wheel that grinds without pause. There's a curious entry in an English sailor's notebook describing how some men developed the ability to fall asleep almost instantly. He claimed that veterans could close their eyes and slip into dreams within minutes, trained by necessity. New recruits, by contrast, tossed and turned, unable to grasp rest before being summoned back to work. He compared it to a soldier sleeping on the battlefield, not restful, but survival. You stumble through the hold, your feet splashing in shallow puddles, your head thick with fatigue. The watch bell echoes again above, its steady rhythm a reminder that time does not belong to you. You wonder how many nights it has been since you slept fully, but the storm erases all sense of days. Darkness and noise blur together. Some historians argue that this fragmented sleep permanently altered sailors' health. Constant interruptions, weakened immune systems, dulled reflexes, and fostered accidents on deck. Others maintain that humans are remarkably adaptable, and that after weeks at sea, the crew settled into the pattern, their bodies adjusting to the rhythm of watches as naturally as breathing. Whatever the truth, you can feel the toll already. Your muscles ache, your thoughts grow sluggish, and even your dreams feel thin and unfinished. You imagine what it must be like for the man now slumped in your hammock. His snores rise almost instantly, proof that exhaustion has triumphed. But how long will he have? An hour? 2? Then he will be shaken awake again, pulled back into the storm's grip. The cycle repeats endlessly, turning men into shadows of themselves. And yet, in these fragments of sleep, life continues. Sailors dream, however briefly. They laugh when they can, they curse when they must, and they rise when ordered. No one asks whether it is sustainable. It's simply island. The ocean demands sacrifice, and sleep is the coin most often paid. As you prepare to take your turn on deck, you glance back once at the rows of hammocks. They sway gently, bodies curled inside like cocoons. The sound of snores mixes with the storm, and for a moment you almost envy those still asleep. But soon enough the bell will ring for them too. No one is spared from the rhythm of the watches. You grip the ladder, climb into the howling wind, and leave the damp hold behind. Yet even as rain lashes your face, you know your thoughts will drift back below, to the hammocks, to the dripping beams, to the restless men who lie suspended between exhaustion and duty. The storm outside hammers without mercy, but down here in the dim belly of the ship, another kind of storm brews quietly in the minds of exhausted sailors. Before sleep, many turn to ritual. You hear whispers ripple across the hold. Not conversations, but muttered prayers, charms, and fragments of rhyme passed from one generation to the next. Each man has his own way of negotiating with the sea, bargaining for a few hours of safe slumber. It is well attested in medieval maritime records that St. Nicholas was invoked more than any other patron. Sailors clutched small wooden tokens, carved in his image, or kissed medallions before closing their eyes. Some believed that uttering his name 3 times would shield them from drowning dreams. Others prayed for Mary's intercession, asking her to cradle them like children until dawn. You lie still and listen as these quiet invocations weave together, a hushed chorus louder than the creak of beams. One peculiar superstition, noted in a Portuguese log, was the habit of placing a knife beneath one's hammock. The edge, they claimed, would cut away evil spirits who crept aboard during storms. Another crew scattered salt across the planks, believing it discouraged restless souls from wandering near sleepers. These charms may seem quaint now, but in the darkness of a heaving ship, when thunder shook the timbers, they were anchors for frayed minds. You glance toward the corner where a sailor, eyes closed, fingers the beads of a rosary, mouthing words in rhythm with the swell. Another man, less devout, rubs a small pouch of herbs between his palms, inhaling its scent as though it carries some invisible shield. Faith here takes many forms: prayer, magic, habit, and none are questioned. To laugh at a man's charm is to deny his only defense against fear. The debate among historians continues over how deeply these rituals were believed. Some argue they were genuine acts of devotion born of desperate faith. Others suggest they were psychological crutches, ways of calming the mind enough to allow sleep. Perhaps both are true. When the sea roared like a beast outside, belief and survival became indistinguishable. You try to imagine sleep without such rituals. Could you close your eyes while lightning flashes overhead, without whispering some protection? Even the skeptical among the crew often found themselves muttering a phrase, touching wood, or tracing a cross. The sea was too vast, too merciless, to face unguarded. A sailor near you begins humming softly, not quite a hymn, not quite a lullaby, but something in between. The tune floats across the hammocks, steady and low. Others join, some with words, some with hums, until the hold fills with a gentle song. It is not rehearsed, not polished, but it binds the men together in a way no rope ever could. The storm above still bellows, but down here, voices rise to meet it. You feel yourself swaying not only with the hammock but with the rhythm of their song. Fear loosens its grip on your chest. You are part of something larger now, not just one body trembling in the dark, but a crew, a brotherhood, sharing the same hope, the same exhaustion. For a few moments, the The storm feels distant, the sea less hostile. The lantern light flickers, shadows dance across bowed heads, and the whispered prayers fade into silence. Each man sinks into his own fragile rest, clinging to his charm, his faith, his ritual. And slowly, despite the thunder, despite the water, despite the creaking timbers, you too surrender. The last thing you hear is the faint scrape of beads in a sailor's hand, and the sigh of men placing their trust in powers beyond the sea. The ship heaves again, but this time your body does not resist. Instead, you feel yourself moving with the sway, as though your hammock is not fighting the sea but learning its rhythm. The storm is still vicious, yet for a moment the rolling motion becomes almost comforting, like being rocked in an enormous cradle. The wood creaks, ropes groan, but you find your breath aligning with the ship's movement. Inhale as you rise, exhale as you sink. Against all odds, the rocking lulls you closer to sleep. It is documented in navigational manuals that sailors sometimes describe the motion of the sea as both curse and blessing. For the new recruit, the sway meant seasickness, dizziness, and endless misery. For the seasoned sailor, the same sway became familiar, even soothing, once the stomach grew accustomed. They claimed that after weeks at sea, they could sleep more easily in a hammock on a rolling ship than in a bed on solid land. Land itself, steady and unmoving, felt unnatural to them. You close your eyes, letting the rise and fall blur into a rhythm. At times the swing is gentle, almost melodic. At others, a violent lurch snaps you half awake, reminding you that this is not kindness but the sea's indifferent hand. Yet in between those shocks, the rhythm carries you. The hammock rocks, your body drifts, and you begin to feel that elusive state where exhaustion outpaces fear. One curious claim appears in a Castilian sailor's diary. He insisted that the rocking not only eased sleep, but shaped dreams. He wrote that when the ship tilted left, his dream followed him into mountains, and when it tilted right, he slid into valleys. Others swore the swaying conjured visions of flying, as if the sea had given them wings. Whether imagination or truth, it hints at the strange intimacy between body and vessel, how the sea crept even into the mind's private theatre. The air is still foul, the noise still deafening, but in this moment, your body no longer fights. Your muscles loosen, your jaw unclenches, and you let yourself swing. The storm outside does not abate, yet here below, sleep feels almost possible. Scholars are not in full agreement about whether this rocking truly improved rest. Some argue it was purely physiological. The vestibular system in the inner ear, designed to balance movement, interprets the sway as a cue to sleep. Others caution that in violent seas, the motion likely caused more harm than good, leaving men battered against their hammocks. Both views have merit, and perhaps both are correct depending on the night. But right now, you understand why old sailors called their hammocks the cradle of Neptune. A sudden jolt throws you sideways, rope digging into your ribs. You grunt, gripping the fabric, heart racing. For an instant, the cradle feels like a trap, a reminder that the sea can tip comfort into terror in a heartbeat. Yet as the ship steadies again, the rhythm resumes. Slowly, your pulse slows, and the rocking once more becomes your ally. Around you, others sway 24 of bodies suspended, moving in chaotic unison. It is a strange sight, if you let yourself picture it. An entire crew rocked to sleep like infants, not by mothers but by the merciless sea. You wonder if the ocean laughs at this irony, cradling the very men who curse it by day. You exhale, long and slow, and your body yields. Fear does not vanish, but it dulls. The cradle swings, the storm rages, and you drift on the thin line between waking and dreaming, carried not by peace but by sheer exhaustion into sleep. Your eyes flutter open, and for a heartbeat you forget where you are. The rocking cradle of the hammock lulls you into half dreams, and when those dreams fracture, you find yourself staring at beams dripping with salt water, lanterns sputtering, and men shifting uneasily in their sleep. The storm has not ceased, But inside your mind, other storms have been brewing, visions born of homesickness and longing. Sleep on a medieval ship is not simply rest, it is escape. Written accounts from sailors across Europe show a recurring theme: dreams of land, of family, of hearths and fields. Men wrote of waking with tears in their eyes, after visions of wives or mothers who seemed so real that the shock of returning to the damp hold left them hollow. It is no wonder. A voyage could stretch for months, and for many, home became as distant as paradise. The body suffered from exhaustion, but the heart suffered from absence. You turn on your side and close your eyes again, and the images come swiftly. You see a cottage with smoke curling from the chimney, a table spread with bread and cheese, the laughter of children you may or may not even have. The mind supplies what it craves. In the gloom, such visions feel sharper than reality. For a brief moment, the stench and the cold vanish. You are home. A curious recollection appears in a Venetian log. Sailors claimed that the sound of waves in their sleep transformed into familiar voices. One man swore he heard his mother calling his name in the crash of surf. Another said the groaning timbers spoke in his native dialect. Perhaps it was imagination, or perhaps the brain, desperate for comfort, reshaped the noise into something it could endure. You wonder how many of the men beside you are hearing voices tonight, half convinced their loved ones are near. But such dreams carry danger too. Some awoke furious, driven to despair by the contrast between visions and reality. Chroniclers note that desertion in port cities was often fueled less by fear of the sea and more by longing sharpened during restless nights. Men who could endure storms sometimes could not endure the ache of absence. Researchers still debate how much these dreams shaped morale. Did they sustain sailors, giving them hope and something to cling to, or did they erode them, reminding them of what was lost? The evidence is contradictory. Perhaps both are true. Dreams that warmed the heart one night could freeze it the next. You lie still, listening to the snores and mutters around you, and think of the delicate balance of memory. Too much homesickness could crush a man, but too little could make him forget who he was. The sea demanded loyalty, but it never replaced the hearth. Somewhere nearby, a sailor whispers his child's name. Another clutches a scrap of cloth, perhaps a remnant of home, pressed tight against his chest. Even in the chaos of the storm, the hold is thick with longing. You feel it like a second atmosphere, heavier than the stench of sweat, heavier than the smoke. You drift again, the rocking carrying you not into sleep, but into memory. You see a door you once closed, a road you once walked. You hear voices that may no longer exist. For a few fleeting moments, the ocean cannot touch you. But when your eyes open again, the dripping beams and swaying lanterns remind you where you truly are, caught between exhaustion and desire, between survival and memory. The dreams fade, and what takes their place is far less gentle. The ship is never silent, and neither are the men who fill it. A chorus of snores rises and falls in uneven rhythm, echoing strangely against the curved hull. Some snore like saws rasping through timber, others like bellows wheezing. The sound does not blend into white noise, it grates, pulling you back from the edge of sleep each time you begin to drift. Contemporary letters written by merchants describe below-deck nights as a hall of restless throats. It was not only snores. Men coughed from the damp, groaned with aching limbs, muttered prayers or curses in half-conscious tones. Even teeth grinding in the dark created a rasping undercurrent. A man might hope the storm outside would mask these noises, but the sea's roar and the human chorus only competed, never cancelled one another. You shift in your hammock, hoping to find a quiet pocket, but noise comes from every side. A sailor to your left whimpers in his sleep, legs jerking as though fleeing some phantom on land. Another hacks violently, spitting phlegm into a rag before rolling back over. A third lets out a low laugh, perhaps trapped in a dream too absurd to stay hidden. The effect is unsettling. You realize you are not in solitude, but in a hive of bodies, each mind wandering its own shadowed path, each voice spilling fragments into the shared dark. A curious entry survives in a Danish mariner's notebook. He claimed that the worst part of the voyage was not storms or hunger, but the unrelenting noise of men sleeping. He wrote that silence became so rare he dreamed of it, imagining himself walking through a meadow where no voices followed. He admitted that upon returning to land, he wept the first night. He slept alone in a quiet bedchamber. For him, the human noise of the hold was the true torture. You try pressing cloth into your ears, but the fabric is damp and offers little relief. The sounds penetrate regardless: snorts, coughs, mutters, groans. The smell mingles with it, as though the senses conspire against you. Your body aches for rest, but your mind thrums with irritation. Every sound feels sharper in the dark, magnified until it seems designed to keep you awake. The scholarly debate continues over whether crews ever truly rested deeply in such conditions. Some argue that men grew accustomed, their brains learning to filter familiar noises as background. Others counter that exhaustion simply forced micro-sleeps, shallow and fragile, leaving long-term damage to body and mind. Whichever theory is correct, you know only that you cannot escape the chorus tonight. A sailor above you suddenly jerks upright, shouting a name you do not recognize. For an instant you think he is awake, but his eyes are closed. He collapses back into his hammock, muttering incoherently, while others chuckle at his outburst. Within moments, the snores resume. You realize that even dreams contribute to the noise, spilling from lips that cannot remain sealed. And so you surrender. Instead of fighting the sound, you begin to listen differently. The snores become waves, the coughs become thunder, the mutters become whispers of wind. You trick yourself into weaving them into the storm's music. It is imperfect, jarring, but it allows your mind a fragile detour. Slowly, as if balancing on a knife's edge, you let yourself drift on the cacophony. Not silence, but survival. The noises of the men blur into background, but another truth presses itself on you with quiet insistence. Not every sailor sleeps in the same place, or in the same manner. In this cramped, floating world, status is measured even at night. Where you lay your head is as much a statement of rank as what you do on deck. From port records and ship manifests, it is clear that officers and higher-ranking crew enjoyed better accommodations, if only by comparison. A first mate or navigator might have a small enclosed berth, lined with planks, where he could stretch out without worrying about dripping beams or swinging feet above his head. The captain himself always claimed the cabin larger, somewhat drier, with a door that could be latched. Common sailors, by contrast, crammed into the hold wherever there was space. Hammocks strung side by side, bodies piled on sacks of cargo, or bare planks slick with seawater. You glance across the dim hold and notice how the men mutter about fairness. Someone curses softly that the officers will sleep without rats scurrying across their blankets tonight. Another jokes bitterly that the captain's snores sound no different than theirs, only muffled by better walls. In moments like this, you feel how hierarchy weighs even more heavily in misery than in comfort. A peculiar anecdote from a Genoese voyage tells of sailors who, in defiance, once dragged their hammocks closer to the officers' quarters, claiming that if the storm took the ship, all should drown together. The captain, furious, ordered them back, but later quietly admitted he admired their stubbornness. Such small rebellions reveal how even the act of sleeping became a negotiation of dignity. The separation is not just physical but psychological. Men in the hold imagine that their leaders, resting in drier bunks, dream more peacefully. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps the walls and the cleaner air ease their minds. Yet it is also possible that command comes with its own weight, that the captain, even in his cabin, lies awake listening for the next shudder that might split his vessel. Historians remain divided on this. Some portray officers as insulated from the crew's hardships, while others insist that their responsibilities made sleep even more elusive. You shift in your hammock and imagine the captain's cabin. A cot, perhaps, with a straw mattress, a lantern burning steadily, a table bolted to the floor where maps lie spread, corners weighted with stones. It is no palace, but compared to the damp hold, it may as well be. You wonder whether he sleeps soundly or stares at the ceiling, counting the hours until dawn. Back here, in the swaying rows of hammocks, you have no such luxury of wonder. Elbows dig into ribs, boots brush against your knees, and every cough feels shared. This is communal sleep in its rawest form, stripped of comfort or privacy. Yet it is also strangely democratic. In the dark, every sailor is reduced to the same exhaustion, the same snores, the same half-remembered dreams. A man near you murmurs that he'd trade his pay for one night in the captain's berth. Another replies that pay won't matter if the ship goes down tomorrow. Laughter ripples faintly, edged with despair. Even in bitterness, camaraderie survives. And so you close your eyes again, knowing that your place in the hierarchy has left you here, among the damp, the vermin, the endless chorus of the hold. You surrender to it not because it is fair, but because there is no choice. The sea does not care for rank, and tonight, neither can you. The night deepens, and with it the violence of the storm. Each wave crashes against the hull with such force that the ship shudders like a living thing under assault. Lightning flares through cracks in the hatch, brief knives of brilliance that slice across the darkness. For a heartbeat, you see every face illuminated, eyes wide, jaws clenched, bodies tense as if the storm itself were staring back. Then the dark swallows everything again, leaving only the memory of that flash. Documents from medieval chroniclers describe storms at sea as ordeals that tested not just seamanship, but sanity. Sailors reported lying awake, hearts racing, convinced the next wave would splinter the hull. To sleep in such moments was to gamble with life itself, yet exhaustion left no alternative. Some men shut their eyes, forcing themselves into half-dreams, while others lay rigid, unable to surrender. Both choices carried their own torment. You lie still, trying to steady your breath, but the thunder makes your chest vibrate. The hammock swings violently, ropes straining as though they might snap. You clutch the edge, fingers aching, afraid you might be flung onto the sodden planks below. Around you, others curse, pray, or cry out. The storm has stripped away bravado. Even seasoned sailors mutter with the voices of frightened children. There's an unsettling tale preserved in a French sailor's journal. He swore that during storms, men often dreamed of drowning while still awake. They felt the rush of water in their throats, gasped desperately, then jolted upright in terror. He admitted he himself sometimes dipped a hand into the trickling leaks above his hammock, just to reassure himself that he still breathed air. Such hallucinations blurred the line between sleep and panic, leaving men too rattled to rest. You hear the timbers moan in agony, the pitch between planks crackling, and you imagine water pouring through in torrents. The image burns in your mind until you shake your head to dispel it. Fear is contagious here. One man's gasp can ripple through the hold like a plague, awakening dozens, all imagining the same catastrophe. Scholars still puzzle over whether fear itself or the physical storm caused the greater harm to sailors' rest. Did men truly fail to sleep because the sea was too loud and violent, or because their minds conjured disaster at every creak? Some argue the psychological weight of storms mattered more than the physical discomfort. Others insist the sheer noise and motion made slumber impossible. Whichever theory holds, the effect was the same. Sailors grew hollow, eyed, brittle, worn down long before land appeared. Another flash of lightning blinds you, and in that instant you see the shadow of a man crossing himself repeatedly, lips moving in frantic prayer. Beside him, another bites his fist to keep from crying aloud. These are not moments of courage, but of raw humanity. Fear, unadorned and unashamed, fills the hold like another passenger. And yet, strangely, there is also endurance. Even as the storm rages, some men force themselves to lie back, to close their eyes, to steal what fragments of rest they can. They accept that fear will never vanish, that the storm will never quiet, but they refuse to surrender entirely. You find yourself following their lead. Slowly, deliberately, you unclench your fingers, let the hammock swing, and allow your breath to match the rhythm of the waves. The storm does not weaken, but you feel a shift inside. Fear is still there, sharp and heavy, but so is fatigue, pressing down like an anchor. Your body chooses survival in the only way it can, by dragging you into sleep even while thunder rumbles above. The storm still howls, but another danger makes its presence felt tonight: the hazards of stumbling through the darkness. You are half awake, tugged from shallow sleep by the watch bell or by a sudden lurch of the ship, and you attempt to climb down from your hammock. The deck beneath you tilts sharply, sending your balance into chaos. A misstep here is no small inconvenience. It is pain, injury, even death waiting in the dark. Records from Hanseatic trading voyages note that accidents below deck were common. With lanterns guttering and the ship in constant motion, men tripped over ropes, slipped on slick planks, or struck their heads against low beams. A sailor could wake bruised, bleeding, or with a twisted ankle simply from trying to find the latrine bucket. Sleep was not a sanctuary, but a risky business, one that required careful calculation even in exhaustion. You move cautiously now, feeling with your toes before committing your weight. The planks are wet, the air thick, and the shadows deeper than any night you have known ashore. The hammock ropes sway, brushing against your face, as though mocking your attempt at steadiness. You grope for a beam, steady yourself, and step again. Every move is deliberate, a small negotiation with danger. One unusual note comes from a Scandinavian log. Sailors sometimes tied small ropes from their hammocks to their wrists or ankles, believing it would guide them back if they rose in the dark. It was a crude solution, but on storm-tossed nights, it kept men from wandering too far and injuring themselves. You imagine the indignity of tethering yourself like livestock, yet also see its wisdom. Better to look foolish than to vanish into the black water sloshing in the hold. The air is pierced suddenly by a cry. Someone has fallen, perhaps missed his footing, perhaps struck by a swinging hammock. The noise stirs others, curses rising in the gloom. A lantern swings closer, its faint glow revealing a man clutching his shin, teeth bared against the pain. He will limp for days, maybe longer. On land, such an injury would be irritating. At sea, it can mean weakness, vulnerability, or even death if infection sets in. You watch him carried back to his berth, and the reminder lingers. Even rest carries peril here. Debates among historians continue on how disciplined crews were in preventing such mishaps. Some argue that strict routines and clear pathways minimized risk. Others, citing accident reports, suggest that chaos was the rule below deck, especially during storms. The truth likely shifted with every voyage, depending on discipline, luck, and the stubbornness of the sea. You return to your hammock, more cautious now. Each rope feels less like a cradle and more like a trap waiting to spill you onto the planks. You curl tightly, trying to limit your movement, afraid of tipping out during the next violent lurch. Fear of injury joins the long list of burdens carried by sleepless men. And yet, after the excitement fades, exhaustion presses back harder. Your eyelids lower again, your body demands its due. Even fear cannot keep you awake forever. The ship tilts, the hammocks sway, and once more you drift into that uneasy slumber, fully aware that danger is always only a heartbeat away. The night stretches on, and though fear and injury lurk in every corner, something else takes shape in the darkness. A fragile sense of brotherhood. Misery, it seems, is best endured when shared. In the storm-tossed hold, where every man shivers under a damp cloak and every hammock swings like a noose waiting to snap, laughter sometimes breaks the gloom. You hear it now, soft at first, then spreading like a spark through dry straw. Surviving letters from Mediterranean merchants often mention this strange camaraderie. Sailors mocked their own suffering with crude jokes, turning lice into ship's pets, or christening the rats with noble titles. One diary recounts a stormy night when a sailor, soaked to the skin, raised his cup and toasted King Neptune's bathhouse. His companions roared with laughter, their voices carrying louder than the thunder. It did not erase their discomfort, but it reshaped it, reminding them that they faced the ordeal together. You shift in your hammock and watch as a man nearby begins humming, then another joins, until half a dozen voices weave a low song. The tune is simple, more chant than melody, but it carries warmth. The words, half prayer and half jest, invoke the sea as a fickle mistress, sometimes cruel, sometimes kind, never predictable. Each verse ends with a burst of chuckles, as though mocking their own fate. In the flickering lantern light, their faces are weary but alive, marked by the stubborn spark of humor. A curious practice noted in Dutch sources describes men sharing stories of absurd encounters with the sea. One tale involves a sailor swearing he once saw a fish climb aboard to avoid drowning during a squall. Another claimed he had trained a rat to fetch crumbs like a dog. These were not meant to be believed, only enjoyed, and the laughter they provoked often eased the edge of fear enough for men to rest. Still, scholars debate whether such camaraderie truly strengthened discipline or merely distracted from hardship. Some argue that humor created bonds, keeping mutiny at bay. Others caution that too much joking undermined authority, feeding discontent. The evidence is mixed, but here in the creaking hold, the laughter feels essential. Without it, the weight of storm and fatigue would be unbearable. You feel it yourself, how the sound of chuckles changes the air. It lightens the oppressive gloom, turning fear into something almost manageable. The smell, the damp, the noise, they remain. But for a few moments they no longer crush you. You are part of a crew bound not only by duty, but by shared absurdity, finding sparks of joy where none should exist. The laughter fades eventually, swallowed by exhaustion. Men sink back into their hammocks, still smiling faintly as sleep overtakes them. You close your eyes too, warmed not by blankets or fire, but by the knowledge that even here, in the darkest of nights, human beings can make light from misery. And so you drift, rocked by both storm and camaraderie, carried toward a sleep that feels just a little less fragile than before. When the laughter dies and the hold sinks back into its restless rhythm, another nightly ritual emerges. The small act of eating or drinking before attempting sleep. Hunger gnaws constantly at sailors, for meals are meager and repetitive, yet the body insists on some offering before it will surrender to rest. You hear the crunch of hardtack between teeth, the faint slosh of ale poured into a wooden cup, the tearing of salted meat that has long since lost any tenderness. Shipping records and provisioning lists reveal the staples of these voyages. Biscuits so hard they could crack teeth, salted beef tough as leather, dried peas, and barrels of weak beer or ale. These rations were not meant to delight, but to endure. Before bed, men often nibbled a final crust, or swallowed a mouthful of ale, hoping it would settle their stomachs and coax drowsiness. The effect was less comfort than ritual, one more attempt to convince the body that night was something other than endless struggle. You chew a fragment of biscuit yourself, feeling it scrape against your gums, its flavor a mix of flour, salt, and the faint tang of mold. It is unpleasant, but it fills the void. You take a sip of ale from a shared cup, the liquid sour but soothing against the dryness in your throat. Around you, others do the same, their movements small and weary, their chewing loud in the cramped silence. A curious anecdote from a Castilian voyage tells of sailors who pretended their hardtack biscuits were loaves from home. They would break them with exaggerated reverence, murmuring blessings or joking that they had stolen bread from a king's table. The ritual did nothing to improve the taste, but it lifted spirits enough to make the meal bearable. It was imagination, not flavor, that sustained them. The problem, of course, was digestion. Salted beef sat heavy in the stomach, especially when followed by weak ale. Some men complained of nightmares after eating too close to sleep, claiming the salt drew terrible visions from the sea. Others swore the alcohol eased their descent into slumber, dulling the edge of fear. The truth likely varied, but the ritual remained. Better to eat something, however unpleasant, than to lie awake with an empty belly. Modern historians remain divided on whether these meals truly offered comfort or only compounded misery? Nutritional studies suggest the constant salt and lack of fresh produce weakened bodies, leaving sailors more vulnerable to scurvy and exhaustion. Yet diaries also show that men clung to their food as one of the few stable certainties of the voyage. Perhaps the act of eating, more than the food itself, gave them a semblance of control. You lick the crumbs from your fingers, swallow the last mouthful of sour ale, and lean back into your hammock. The taste lingers unpleasant, but grounding. Around you the chewing slows, cups are set aside, and men curl deeper into their cloaks. The ship rocks on, the storm roars, but bellies are at least partly full. Sleep may not come easily, but hunger will not be the reason it fails. And so you close your eyes, feeling the weight of food in your stomach, heavy but steady, and let exhaustion pull you once more toward the thin line between waking and dreaming. You drift into uneasy slumber, but the ocean does not grant peace. Dreams on a medieval ship are often darker than the storm itself, and tonight they come quickly. You feel the hammock rock harder, though your body has not moved. Water rises around your legs, cold and merciless. You gasp, but no sound comes out. In your dream, you are sinking. The sea swallows you whole, salt burning your throat, while distant shapes writhe in the blackness below. Contemporary shipboard accounts make it clear that nightmares of drowning were common. Sailors spent so much of their lives staring into endless water that it inevitably bled into their sleep. Men described visions of collapsing masts, of waves higher than mountains, of their ship vanishing beneath them. Some claimed they awoke with lungs aching, convinced they had inhaled seawater. These were not idle fancies, but the nightly echoes of their deepest fear that the ocean was always waiting. You toss in your hammock, clutching the edges as if they might hold you above the waves. Around you, others stir restlessly too, muttering words you cannot make out. One man cries aloud, shouting for his mother before his voice cracks into a whimper. Another kicks violently, nearly flipping himself over. The hold becomes a theatre of nightmares, each sailor fighting battles unseen, their struggles made audible in the darkness. There's an unsettling note preserved in a Low Countries log. A captain recorded that his crew spoke of sea monsters haunting their sleep, tentacled shapes coiled around their hammocks, dragging them toward the depths. Some sailors swore they had seen ghost ships glide silently past in their dreams, crewed by the drowned dead. Such images terrified men, yet they repeated them to each other, as if naming the visions gave them power. Your heart pounds as your own dream shifts. A pale hand rises from the puddle below, dripping water, fingers stretching toward you. You jerk awake with a gasp, sweat chilling your skin despite the cold air. Relief floods in, but only for a moment because you hear another man sobbing softly in his sleep, trapped in his own nightmare. It is clear that the ocean has invaded not just the ship but every mind aboard. Scholars disagree on whether such dreams weakened sailors or hardened them. Some argue that constant nightmares eroded morale, leaving crews brittle and fearful. Others suggest that living daily with such terror in their sleep made men strangely resilient, accustomed to fear until it no longer paralyzed them. Evidence from journals supports both views, leaving the truth uncertain. What is certain is the toll you feel now, your pulse racing, your body tense, even as exhaustion begs you to close your eyes again. You lie back, eyes wide open, unwilling to return to sleep too quickly. Yet slowly, inevitably, your lids grow heavy. Perhaps the sea will spare you this time, or perhaps the same dark visions will come again. On this ship, even your dreams are not your own. The storm outside still batters the ship, but inside the hold, another rhythm beats steadily, the tolling of the ship's bells. Through the roar of waves and the creak of timber, you hear their metallic clang drift down from the deck. Each strike marks the passing of a half hour, each sequence of chimes dividing the endless night into ordered fragments. For the sailors, the bells are not just timekeepers, they are lifelines, reminders that night is finite, that dawn will eventually come. It is recorded in navigational manuals that ships used bells to regulate watches. 8 half-hour intervals, or glasses, structured the crew's duties, with bells struck once for each passing glass. To sleep in such an environment meant that time was never yours. Even in dreams, the clang of the bell seeped through, dragging you back toward awareness. If you were lucky, you woke knowing you had a few more glasses to rest. If unlucky, the sound summoned you directly to duty. You lie back, listening to the pattern. 1 strike, then silence. Later, 2, then 3. The intervals blur as exhaustion fogs your mind, but the rhythm is relentless. It becomes part of the storm's orchestra. The bass of thunder, the groan of timbers, the hiss of spray, and now the metallic punctuation of bells above. A curious anecdote from a Burgundian trader describes how sailors often measured their sleep not in hours but in bells. One man boasted that he had once slept through 6 bells without waking, a feat treated with the same awe as hauling a sail in a gale. Another grumbled that he never managed more than 2 before being roused. To speak in bells was to measure survival in manageable fragments, to carve order out of the chaos of the sea. You realize the bells are both comfort and torment. They remind you that time moves forward, that the storm cannot last forever, yet they also fracture rest, denying the illusion of timeless slumber. You cannot forget where you are. The bells will not let you. Their clang slices through even the deepest dreams, pulling you back to the damp hold, to the swaying hammocks, to the endless night. Historians still argue about how sailors perceived this constant marking of time. Some believe the bells gave reassurance, a rhythm that steadied their minds against the formlessness of ocean life. Others suggest it amplified their fatigue, a cruel reminder that their rest was always measured, never whole. Both views hold weight, and tonight you feel both at once: the comfort of rhythm, the frustration of interruption. You shift in your hammock and listen closely. The clang echoes strangely in the hold, warped by wood and water. For a moment it sounds like a distant church bell, calling you home across miles of sea. The thought is almost enough to bring tears. Then another strike follows, harsh and metallic, reminding you it belongs not to land but to the relentless schedule of the voyage. The bells continue, steady as a heartbeat, unmoved by storm or exhaustion. They are impartial, as indifferent as the sea itself. And as you let the sound wash over you, you realize that, despite everything, you are grateful for them. In a world where fear and chaos reign, even a harsh clang can be a tether. You close your eyes, counting bells instead of sheep, and let the rhythm carry you closer to sleep. For hours the storm has screamed, but then suddenly, almost cruelly, it falters. The ship still rocks, the timbers still moan, but the roar of wind softens, and the hammering of rain slackens into drizzle. In the hold, men stir. Silence at sea is never total, yet compared to the chaos that preceded it, the new quiet feels enormous, almost holy. You lie there listening, half disbelieving, as though the storm might be holding its breath. Sailors' diaries often describe these pauses with awe. Between tempests, when the wind eased and the waves fell into long rolling swells, a hush would descend. Some likened it to the breath of God, others to the stillness before a predator strikes. For men whose nights were filled with thunder, even a short spell of calm seemed miraculous. Many confessed they feared such calm more than the storm, convinced it was the sea luring them into false peace. You feel it too, that eerie blend of relief and unease. The lantern flames no longer whip about but burn steady. The hammocks sway more gently, ropes creaking with a slower rhythm. A man nearby sighs in his sleep, his face softening. Another whispers that he can finally hear his own thoughts again. For the first time tonight, you realize your muscles have loosened, your jaw unclenched. Calm, fragile as it is, has seeped into your bones. One unusual story comes from a Catalan voyage. Sailors swore that during such lulls they could hear voices on the wind faint singing, as though sirens whispered just beyond the hull. Some claimed it was the sea itself, crooning to weary men. coaxing them into deeper sleep. Others dismissed it as imagination, the mind filling the silence with echoes of longing. But the detail appears often enough in accounts to suggest that many men heard something when the storm hushed. You lie still, straining your ears. All you catch is the slow slap of water against the planks and the faint creak of beams. Yet there is a presence in the stillness, a weight of quiet that feels alive. The storm's absence is not peace, it is anticipation, like the eye of a hurricane, or the pause in breath before a scream. Researchers continue to debate how sailors responded to these rare calms. Some argue that they seized the chance to rest, collapsing gratefully into deeper sleep. Others insist that unease kept them awake, listening for the next onslaught. Perhaps both are true. Tonight, you feel both impulses warring inside you, the urge to surrender and the instinct to stay alert. You choose surrender. Slowly, carefully, you let yourself believe in the calm. The rocking of the ship is gentle now, the hold quieter, the air a little less oppressive. You close your eyes, telling yourself the storm has spent its fury for now. Even if the silence is temporary, even if it hides another tempest, you will take what it offers. For the first time in hours, you feel the possibility of true rest. And so, rocked by swells rather than battered by waves, you drift towards sleep again, carried not by fear but by the fragile grace of calm. The stillness is short-lived, and though the storm does not return with full fury, another reminder of hierarchy emerges as you shift in your hammock. The captain sleeps apart. You think of him in his private quarters, the only cabin on the ship with a door that shuts. Compared to your damp, crowded hold, his world seems almost another realm. It is well documented in maritime records that captains reserved the stern cabin, often fitted with a narrow cot, a desk, and a small chest for personal belongings. While hardly luxurious by land standards, it was palatial compared to the hammocks strung shoulder to shoulder in the hold. The captain's bed often had a straw mattress, sometimes even a blanket of wool instead of mere canvas. He could close a door against the stench and noise, though never fully against the storm. You picture him now, lying beneath a lantern fixed to the wall, map spread on the desk nearby, the ship's log open to the day's entry. His window, a stern gallery if the vessel is large enough, rattles with the sea's spray, but the air he breathes is less foul than yours. The thought of such separation breeds mutters in the hold. A sailor beside you grumbles that the captain dreams of gold while they drown in sweat and vermin. Another counters that command carries its own curses that the man in the stern cannot sleep because the ship's fate weighs on his chest. One curious detail survives in a Flemish sailor's tale. During a voyage through the Bay of Biscay, the captain, unable to rest in his own cabin, abandoned it and chose instead to sleep among the men in the hold. He claimed he could not command them by day if he did not share their misery by night. Some saw it as noble. Others suspected he feared mutiny if he kept himself apart. Whether genuine or strategic, the act was remembered long after the voyage. Scholars remain divided on whether officers truly enjoyed their relative comfort. Some argue that even the smallest privileges, dryness, privacy, cleaner air, made a difference, cementing authority. Others note that sleeplessness plagued captains as much as sailors, since responsibility kept them restless. Perhaps the truth lies in between. Their bunks were drier, but their dreams were heavier. You turn in your hammock and imagine yourself in that cabin. Would the cot feel softer, the air easier, the silence deeper, or would the solitude be worse, leaving you alone with the creak of timbers and the weight of decisions? Here in the hold, misery is at least shared. Every cough, every groan, every muttered prayer is a reminder that you are not alone. In the captain's cabin, the silence might be more suffocating than the stench. Still, envy lingers. You think of his thicker blanket, his bolted desk, his locked chest of belongings, small things yet immense in this floating world. For you, sleep is fragile, broken, stolen in scraps. For him, perhaps it comes more easily or perhaps not at all. Either way, the gulf between stern and hold feels wider tonight than the sea itself. And so you close your eyes again, swaying among the common crew, wondering what it must be like to sleep in command, where every dream is haunted not by vermin or damp, but by the burden of a ship and all who sail within it. The storm has eased, but the night is long, and sleep never comes easily. After food, after prayer, after muttered complaints about the captain's cot, another sound rises in the hold's soft humming. It begins with one man, then spreads in ripples. Soon half a dozen voices hum together, blending with the creak of timbers and the sigh of waves. The melody is simple, repeating like the sea itself, but in its repetition lies comfort. Surviving accounts from Iberian voyages mention this habit of night singing. Sailors would share snatches of ballads, hymns, or working chants, altering the words to suit their mood. A verse about a saint might be followed by a crude joke about hardtack, or a love song twisted into a parody about rats. The songs were rarely sung in full, only fragments, enough to stitch a fragile net of sound against the vast silence of the ocean. You hear it now, low and steady, a patchwork of languages and tones. Some voices are strong, others wavering, but together they weave a kind of spell. For a moment, the hold feels less like a prison and more like a gathering hall. The storm may rage outside, but here below, men reclaim a piece of themselves through song. One unusual detail appears in a Venetian account. Sailors swore that singing before sleep could chase the sea from their heads. The rhythm of the chant, they believed, loosened the grip of fear, as though their voices built a barrier between themselves and the ocean's fury. Others claimed it offended spirits, ensuring they left the ship alone. Whether superstition or psychology, the effect was the same. The air grew warmer, softer, more human. You hum along, hesitant at first, then stronger. The notes vibrate in your chest, mingling with those around you until individual voices blur. The words do not matter, the act of joining does. The hammock sways, the air still reeks, but now the noise is yours, not the storm's. For a few fleeting minutes, the ship's belly feels alive with harmony. Historians continue to debate the role of music on voyages. Some argue it was chiefly practical, tied to labor and rhythm on deck. Others emphasize its emotional weight, pointing to songs as anchors of sanity during long nights. Both views hold truth, and tonight you understand the second. Music is not luxury, here it is medicine. Gradually the humming fades. Men drift into sleep, their voices softening into snores. You remain awake a moment longer, feeling the afterglow of sound in your chest. The silence that follows is not empty but full, layered with memory of song. And as your eyes close, you carry those notes with you, a lullaby stitched from exhaustion, humor, faith, and the stubborn will to endure. The songs fade into silence, and once again the hold reverts to the uneasy rhythm of snores, groans, and dripping leaks. But as the hours stretch on, the toll of this fractured existence begins to reveal itself. Sleep, so often broken, so rarely complete, leaves men weakened in body and mind. You can feel it yourself, the ache in your limbs, the heaviness behind your eyes, the sluggishness in your thoughts. Exhaustion is not simply an inconvenience here, it is a danger. Medical treatises from the late medieval period mention shipboard maladies, linked not only to diet and dampness but to poor rest. Chronic fatigue was known to make sailors more prone to fever, injury, and despair. Officers noted in logs that men who missed too many hours of sleep became clumsy on deck, slow to respond to orders, and quick to quarrel. On stormy nights, when every mistake could be fatal, a tired hand was as great a threat as a broken mast. You watch now as a man stumbles in the dark, nearly tripping over a coil of rope. His shipmate catches him with a curse, shaking his head. The stumble is small, but it speaks volumes. How many tasks, from tying a knot to steering the rudder, might falter tomorrow because bodies and minds are dulled by lack of sleep? A striking note in a Hanseatic logbook describes sailors who began hallucinating after too many broken nights. One man swore he saw a candle flame dancing on the sea, Another claimed to hear bells ringing underwater. Their companions laughed at first, but soon others reported similar visions. Whether born of exhaustion or fear, such illusions blurred the line between waking and dreaming, leaving crews unnerved. You feel the edges of that delirium yourself. The lantern light flickers, and for an instant you imagine faces in the smoke, watching you. The creak of a beam becomes a whisper, almost forming words. You shake your head, reminding yourself it is fatigue, nothing more. Yet the thought lingers. How many sailors lost their grip on reality long before they lost their lives to the sea? Scholars argue about the long-term effects of such deprivation. Some suggest sailors built resilience, adapting to broken rest until their bodies endured it almost naturally. Others contend that this constant exhaustion shortened lives, weakened constitutions, and fed the high mortality rates of maritime communities. Whatever the truth, your own aching body insists that the cost is real and immediate. The man beside you coughs violently, his whole frame shaking. When he finally slumps back, his face gleams with sweat. Illness thrives in this exhaustion. Fevers spread quickly when men are too weak to resist them. The hold becomes both bedchamber and sickroom, every hammock a potential deathbed. You realize grimly that rest is not simply about comfort, it is about survival. And yet, even as your thoughts darken, your body surrenders once more. Fatigue outweighs fear, outweighs stench, outweighs even the itch of vermin. You close your eyes, drifting into shallow, broken slumber. Tomorrow, you will rise weaker, slower, perhaps sicker. But for tonight, there is no other choice. Sleep may be poison, but it is also medicine, and you have no power to refuse it. By now, the patterns of the night feel familiar: storm, noise, hunger, fear, but among sailors, familiarity bred its own folk remedies. Men clung to little tricks and charms, each convinced his method was the key to better rest. Some worked, others did not, but all gave the illusion of control in a world where control was scarce. Contemporary journals hint at these makeshift cures. One sailor chewed dried herbs before bed, claiming the bitter taste kept away night sweats. Another rubbed garlic on his skin, insisting it repelled lice as well as evil spirits. A third swore by knotting a length of rope 3 times, then laying it beneath his hammock, an act, he said, tied down bad dreams. These practices were rarely sanctioned by officers, but no one interfered. On a stormy voyage, any comfort was tolerated. You notice a man nearby carefully tucking a sprig of dried rosemary into the folds of his blanket. The scent, faint but sharp, cuts briefly through the stale air. He closes his eyes with a look of satisfaction, as though convinced the herb will guard his sleep. Another sailor rubs pitch into his palms, muttering that the sticky smell keeps vermin from biting. It is hard to know whether either method works, but the men believe, and belief is half the battle. One unusual remedy, recorded in a Flemish log, describes sailors who placed their boots beneath their hammocks, soles facing outward, to ward off spirits said to creep in through the floor. Another account mentions sailors who traced protective circles in chalk on the deck before lying down. Such gestures may sound quaint now, but for exhausted men in a leaking wooden shell surrounded by endless sea, the line between charm and necessity blurred easily. Scholars are divided on whether these folk remedies had genuine effect. Some argue they provided psychological relief, helping sailors relax enough to drift into sleep. Others dismiss them as useless gestures born of desperation. Yet both sides agree on one point: rituals mattered. In a life dictated by chaos, even a scrap of habit could anchor the mind. You think of your own habits on land, perhaps a warm drink, a fire, a familiar bed. Here, none are possible, so you improvise. You pull your cloak tight and trace a slow pattern with your finger against the wood of your hammock, imagining it as a charm. It does not matter if it works. It matters that it feels like something. The air thickens with the mingling of scents: rosemary, garlic, smoke, damp wool. It is not pleasant, but it is different enough to distract your mind. You hear one sailor whispering to himself, repeating a rhyme like a lullaby. Another hums under his breath, the tune more ritual than song. These little acts form a patchwork of resilience, each man weaving his own barrier against sleeplessness. Eventually, your own charm, simple as it is, begins to work. Your eyelids grow heavy, the storm's noise dulls, and you slip towards slumber. Whether herbs or garlic or rope truly help is a question for scholars. For sailors, the answer is simpler. If it helps you close your eyes, it is worth believing. The night deepens, and with it, the old stories return. When the body is too tired to move and the air too heavy to breathe, sailors fill the silence with whispers of the sea's mysteries. You hear them now, two men trading tales beneath their hammocks, voices hushed as though afraid the ocean itself might be listening. Accounts from medieval voyages confirm that storytelling was a common companion to sleepless nights. These were not cheerful fables, but grim legends. Cursed voyages, ghostly ships glimpsed through lightning, drowned men who returned to claim their shipmates. In the absence of books or comfort, such tales gave shape to the fear already thrumming through every heart. A storm was terrifying enough. A storm haunted by spectres was worse. Tonight's story drifts through the hold like smoke. A sailor swears his uncle once sailed a ship where a man who drowned in the rigging was heard whistling in the night for weeks afterward. Another adds a tale of a vessel that vanished in calm seas, its lanterns still burning when found adrift, the crew nowhere in sight. The listeners groan or laugh nervously, but none dismiss the stories outright. To deny them would be to tempt fate. One peculiar tradition, recorded in a Catalan log, describes sailors tossing bits of bread into the sea during storms, believing it would appease the hungry spirits below. Another account mentions coins slipped between the deck planks as offerings to drowned comrades. These rituals blurred the line between respect and superstition, but they gave men a sense that they were not entirely powerless against the unknown. You feel the weight of these stories as you lie in your hammock. The creak of timber becomes a ghostly footstep, the drip of water, a phantom's sigh. Your rational mind insists it is nonsense, but exhaustion leaves you vulnerable. The sea is vast, the night endless, and in that expanse, anything feels possible. Scholars still debate whether such legends were believed literally or served more as metaphors for the dangers of seafaring. Some argue sailors truly feared spirits clinging to the hull. Others suggest the tales were coping mechanisms, giving men a way to voice their dread. Perhaps both are true. What matters is the effect. The stories made the hold feel alive with unseen presences, magnifying every noise into omen. A sudden gust rattles the hatch, and several men flinch. Nervous laughter follows, but it is thin. Someone mutters a prayer. Another spits on the deck to ward off ill luck. These responses are automatic, ingrained by tradition as much as belief. You realize that in the fragile hours before dawn, legends become more powerful than storms. You close your eyes, whispering nothing, choosing silence over superstition. But the stories linger anyway, woven into the dark like cobwebs. You wonder if tomorrow the same tales will be told again, reshaped and exaggerated, feeding the cycle anew. For now, you surrender to them, as you surrender to the sea, knowing that in this floating world, fear itself is as constant a companion as the waves. By the time the stories fade, your body is past weary. The storm has weakened, though the sea still churns, and for once the hammocks sway in something closer to rhythm than chaos. You realize that, despite the vermin, the stench, and the endless noise, there are nights when sailors manage true rest. Rare, fragile, but real moments when exhaustion and circumstance align just enough to allow the body to sink deeply into sleep. Shipping logs occasionally mention these blessed intervals. Calm seas, steady winds, and a disciplined watch meant some crew could sleep for 3, even 4 uninterrupted hours. To a modern ear, that may sound insufficient, but for men used to scraps of rest, it was luxury. One sailor wrote with awe of a night when he woke to find he had not stirred once, calling it a gift from God greater than gold. You feel the difference immediately. The hammock rocks gently, not violently. The air, though still foul, is less suffocating with the hatch partly open. No one coughs nearby, no one cries out. Even the rats seem subdued, scurrying less urgently. For the first time in days, you believe in the possibility of comfort. A curious anecdote from a Hanseatic voyage tells of sailors who, on rare calm nights, dreamed not of drowning but of feasts and laughter. One man claimed he smelled roasted meat in his sleep, though no such meal had touched his lips for months. Another woke laughing from a dream of dancing, insisting he had never felt so rested. Whether the sea allowed these visions or the mind seized them greedily when untroubled, such nights became legends themselves, remembered long after storms were forgotten. You let your body loosen completely, arms slack, breath steady. The hammock cradles you as though the sea has momentarily chosen mercy. The usual irritants, drips of water, scratching vermin, sour air fade into the background. Even the snores and mutters of shipmates seem gentler, blending into a chorus less hostile than before. Historians have long discussed whether sailors truly found restorative sleep or simply collapsed into unconsciousness too deep for memory. Some argue that constant fatigue meant the body never fully healed. Others point to accounts like these, suggesting that when conditions aligned, even the hardest voyage could offer moments of genuine restoration. Whichever is true, tonight you feel it. The slow, soothing pull of sleep that does not fight you but welcomes you. You dream not of drowning, not of monsters, but of sunlight over calm waters. In your vision the ship glides smoothly, gulls wheel above, and laughter drifts from the deck. For once, the ocean does not menace but embraces. It is a dream born of exhaustion, but also of longing for peace, for stability, for the smallest kindness in a world built of storms. And as you drift deeper, you realize how rare such a gift island tomorrow may bring: thunder, waves, or rats in your hammock. But tonight, for a few precious hours, the sea lets you rest. When dawn finally presses faint light through the hatch, you feel as though you have lived a lifetime in the night. The storm has quieted to a grey drizzle, and the air below deck is heavy with the aftermath of endurance. Men stir reluctantly, rubbing eyes red from smoke and exhaustion, groaning as stiff joints protest. The hammocks sway lazily now, but the relief is not immediate. The toll of sleeplessness lingers in every hunched back and hollow gaze. Port records and diaries often mention mornings after storms as moments of collective weariness. Crewmen stumbled onto the deck with swollen eyes and aching limbs, their bodies battered more by fatigue than by waves. Even the officers, who slept in drier quarters, carried the mark of the night. Tasks that normally required precision coiling ropes, raising sails, mending lines were performed clumsily, with more curses than usual. Fatigue turned the simplest job into a hazard. You drag yourself upright, joints stiff, and swing your legs onto the damp planks. The smell is worse than ever: sweat, mildew, stale ale, and the sour tang of vomit left from seasick men. No one bothers to clean yet. The storm has left too much to repair above. Below, you sit in the aftermath, your body hollowed by broken rest. A curious observation from a French merchant vessel notes that sailors sometimes moved like sleepwalkers after such nights. They carried out their duties without speaking, eyes unfocused, as though still trapped in dreams. The chronicler compared them to ghosts, claiming the ship itself seemed crewed by phantoms until proper rest was restored. You glance around now and see the truth of his words. Men moving sluggishly, hair plastered to foreheads, eyes dulled, as if only half alive. Some historians argue that this collective fatigue bred disciplined men too tired to quarrel, too drained to mutiny. Others suggest it eroded morale, feeding resentment toward officers who slept better. Both views may hold truth, depending on the voyage. Here, in the dim hold, you feel only the dull ache of survival. No energy remains for anger. All thought is bent toward enduring the next task. You hear the call to deck, muffled but insistent, and men begin to rise. Hammocks are abandoned, boots pulled on reluctantly, cloaks wrapped tighter. The day will bring repairs, swabbing, hauling, and endless labour. But for now, there is a pause, a groggy limbo between waking and duty. Some men close their eyes again, snatching seconds before being dragged away. Others chew leftover crumbs, their jaws working mechanically. You realize that the morning after a storm is its own trial. It is not violent like the night, but heavy, dragging, suffused with the weight of fatigue. Sleep has not restored you. It has only softened the edges of despair. You stand slowly, stretching sore muscles, and prepare to climb into the wet grey dawn. And as you ascend the ladder, you glance once more at the hammocks swaying in the gloom. They look like cocoons, fragile and temporary, holding men who must wake before they are ready. In those hammocks lies the truth of seafaring life. Rest is never whole, always partial, always stolen. Yet even fragments are enough to keep the voyage moving, one weary dawn at a time. The drizzle continues as the day drags on, but night always returns, and with it the same question: how much longer can this be endured? A voyage across oceans meant not just one storm, not just one sleepless night, but weeks upon weeks of repetition. Each sunset brought the knowledge that you would once again face the dripping beams, the groaning timbers, the vermin, the snores, and the endless swing of hammocks. Sleep was never guaranteed, only bargained for, stolen in fragments like coins dropped into a bottomless sea. Surviving journals make clear that sailors often spoke of time not in days but in nights endured. They measured progress less by distance sailed than by the number of restless nights survived. To say, "It has been 20 nights," was not simply to mark a calendar, but to declare a battle fought 20 times against fatigue, fear, and the sea itself. You feel that truth now, lying back in your hammock on yet another night. The storm is lighter, but the hold remains the same: damp, crowded, suffocating. Your body aches not just from this voyage, but from all voyages layered together, the memory of sleeplessness compounding. Even dreams feel thinner, frayed at the edges by overuse. One unusual anecdote from a German log describes a sailor who kept tally marks scratched into the wood above his hammock, one for every night at sea. His shipmates mocked him at first, but soon they began counting alongside him, whispering the number each evening before attempting rest. The marks became a ritual, proof that they were still enduring, even when sleep eluded them. By voyage's end, the beam was scarred with hundreds of lines, a silent testimony to survival. You wonder if your own body carries similar scars etched not on wood but on flesh and spirit. Your shoulders are sore from clutching the hammock, your skin raw from dampness and vermin, your mind dulled by fatigue. Yet you continue. Every sailor continues. Because the alternative, collapse, despair, surrender, is not permitted by the sea. Scholars debate whether long voyages left permanent damage on sailors. Some argue that constant exhaustion shortened lives, weakening hearts and immune systems. Others suggest resilience was forged here, that men emerged tougher, capable of enduring hardship on land with unnatural ease. Perhaps both are true, depending on the man. For you, in this moment, only the immediate truth matters. Survival depends on finding a way to rest, no matter how broken that rest may be. The hammocks sway again, slower than before, and you find yourself counting the rhythm, as if tallying invisible marks of your own. Each swing is another second survived, another step toward land. The noises of the hold no longer grate as sharply. Your body has grown numb to them. Even the smell seems less harsh, dulled by habit. Fatigue reshapes the senses until misery becomes background. And so, once again, you drift into shallow sleep. Not peaceful, not whole, but enough. Enough to carry you through the next watch, the next day, the next storm. Enough to keep the voyage moving. For in the end, survival at sea is not about victory over the ocean, but about endurance against the nights. Another night arrives, indistinguishable from the many before it, and yet it feels heavier somehow, as if the sea itself is reminding you that this is the life you have chosen, or perhaps the life that has chosen you. The hammocks sway, the air thickens, the rats skitter, and the bells toll. You close your eyes and realize that on a medieval ship, sleep is not rest but a fragile truce, a bargain struck between exhaustion and the ocean's indifference. Contemporary chronicles are blunt about this reality. Sailors did not expect comfort. They expected to endure. A voyage was measured not by hours of rest, but by the ability to function despite the lack of it. To sleep at sea was to submit to chaos, sometimes rocked gently by the waves, sometimes hurled awake by thunder, sometimes nipped at by vermin or startled by nightmares. The body never fully healed, it merely survived, and still the ship sailed on. You think of all the elements that have plagued these nights, the creaking timbers that sang like mourners, the dripping leaks that soaked blankets, the endless snores and coughs, the vermin scratching at your skin, the rituals of prayer and charm, the brief relief of laughter, the weight of homesick dreams. Each fragment added to the tapestry of sleeplessness, weaving a life both miserable and strangely resilient. One peculiar note from a Venetian captain's log captures this duality. He wrote that sailors slept as if drowning, waking as if born anew. Each night was death in miniature, each dawn a rebirth, fragile but sufficient. It was not restorative rest, but it was enough to keep the ship alive, enough to push men across oceans they might otherwise never have dared to face. Scholars still debate whether this endurance was sustainable. Some point to the high mortality rates among sailors as proof that sleeplessness and exhaustion exacted a fatal price. Others counter that men returned from voyages hardened, capable of surviving conditions that would break most on land. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps the sea simply revealed the limits of each man, sorting those who could endure from those who could not. You lie still now, eyes half shut, listening to the storm's remnants fade into the hum of the ship's body. The sea will rage again tomorrow, and the rituals will return: songs, prayers, jokes, charms. Sleep will be stolen in fragments, as it always island. There will be no perfect night, no true silence, no lasting comfort. And yet, despite everything, you realize you are still here, still enduring, still drifting between wakefulness and dreams on this endless ocean. The sea is not cruel, not kind. It's simply island, and in its vastness, sailors learned the greatest lesson, that survival is not about mastery, but about adaptation. To sleep on a medieval ship during stormy nights was to accept fragility, to surrender to imperfection, and to find strength in endurance. You close your eyes one last time, rocked in your canvas cradle, and surrender once more to the ocean's indifferent embrace. And now, as we leave behind the crowded hold, the storm-tossed hammocks, and the weary men clinging to fragments of sleep, let us soften our steps. The voyage has been long, filled with noise and fear and exhaustion, yet also threaded with resilience, laughter, and the stubborn will to rest, even in the harshest of nights. Take a slow breath. Picture the sea not as a raging force, but as a wide, calm expanse, its waves rolling gently under a pale silver moon. The creaking of timbers is softer now, more like the purring of a giant cat than the groans of a tortured hull. The air grows cooler, fresher, easier to draw into your lungs. You are no longer trapped in the stench of tar and sweat, but drifting freely in a space washed clean by dawn. Let the images fade. The rats, the dripping leaks, the muttered prayers and the tolling bells. They belong to another time, another life. What remains is the rhythm of the waves, steady and soothing, carrying you toward rest. Imagine yourself lying in your own hammock, but this time the sway is gentle, predictable, cradling you in safety rather than chaos. Each swing rocks you deeper into calm. Your eyelids are heavy now. The storm is far behind. The voices of sailors grow faint, replaced by the soft hush of the ocean's breath. You are not fighting for scraps of rest anymore, you are drifting into full, quiet sleep. So let go. Let the sea carry you, not as an enemy, but as a gentle companion. You have endured the voyage. You have survived the storm. Now you may finally close your eyes, safe and calm. Sweet dreams.